So here's the thought. What if our whole society is sick? And what if the doctor we need isn't a physician, but a philosopher? That's the lens we're using today as we dive into the mind of John Rawls, truly one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century.
I mean, think about it for a second. What if philosophy wasn't just this, abstract thing you study in a classroom? What if it could be a form of medicine? A practical tool that could actually diagnose what's wrong with us collectively, and maybe, just maybe, prescribe a cure? Well, this one thinker, John Rawls, he took that idea and just ran with it. He designed this incredible, complete treatment plan to try and heal our most chronic social illnesses. He didn't just sit around and vaguely ponder justice. No, he built a whole system, a kind of social therapy aimed right at the problems that have been sticking with us for centuries. So let's see how his diagnosis begins.
All right, so a sickness in society. Just like any good doctor, the very first step is figuring out what's wrong. You can't just start throwing medicine at a problem. You have to understand the symptoms first. So, the big question is our society actually sick? It sounds kind of dramatic, right? But it's a question John Rawls took incredibly seriously. He looked at the world around him and saw what he thought were clear, troubling signs of a society in really poor health. And what's crazy is just how familiar these symptoms sound today. We're talking about persistent, deep-seated inequality, the way some groups are always treated as less than, that feeling of collapsing confidence in our institutions, and just a general civic mistrust. Rawls looked at all this and said, hey, these aren't just a bunch of random separate problems. These are all symptoms of the same underlying sickness. Okay, so now for the philosopher's diagnosis. We've got the symptoms laid out, so how did Rawls dig deeper to find the root cause? Well, he didn't just guess. He developed some really powerful conceptual tools to get the job done. And this is really the key to his whole way of thinking. For Rawls, injustice isn't just about, bad people doing bad things. He said the problem is way deeper than that. It's actually baked into the basic structure of society itself. It's in the DNA of our major political and economic institutions. The system, he argued, is where the sickness really lives. So, to figure out what's wrong with that basic structure, Rawls comes up with this brilliant thought experiment. He calls it the original position. Here's the setup. Imagine you and a bunch of other people get to start a society from scratch. You all get together in this hypothetical meeting room to agree on the most fundamental principles of justice that are going to run the whole show. But here's the catch. And this is the absolute genius of it. You have to make these rules from behind what he famously called the veil of ignorance. What does that mean? It means you have no idea who you're going to be in this new society. You don't know your class, your race, your gender, what you're good at, nothing. It's like a surgical procedure that removes all your personal biases. You're forced to pick rules that are fair for everybody. Because hey, you could end up being literally anyone when that veil lifts. Now, to really get why a tool like this is so important, let's pull in an idea from a totally different field, cognitive science. Turns out our brains have this thing that scientists call the left brain interpreter. It's basically our mind's built-in PR agent. It's constantly spinning stories to make sense of our actions and, this is the important part, to justify the status quo, to make us feel okay with the way things are, even when they're not fair. And that's the real power of the veil of ignorance. It's a philosophical tool designed to interrupt that storyteller, to hit the mute button on our internal rationalizations. It forces us to stop defending the current setup just because it works for us, and instead ask a much harder question. What would a truly fair society look like if I had no idea where I'd end up in it? All right, so we've run the diagnostic tests. It's time to move on to the prescription. If you're behind the veil of ignorance, what kind of treatment plan, what principles of justice would you actually choose to create a healthy society? Rawls was pretty sure that any rational person in that situation would agree on two main principles. First up is the liberty principle. This one's simple. Everyone gets the most extensive set of basic liberties you can imagine, and this is non-negotiable. You can't trade freedom for anything else. Second is the equality principle, and this one's a little more complex. It says, sure, you can have social and economic inequalities, but only if they pass two really tough tests. First, every job and position has to be open to everyone under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. And second, and this is the real bombshell, any inequalities that do exist have to be set up so they provide the greatest possible benefit to the least advantaged members of society. And that last part, that's the core of his whole prescription. It's called the difference principle, and it completely flips the script on how we usually talk about inequality.
See, Rawls isn't saying we have to get rid of all inequality. He's saying any inequality that exists has to be justified from the viewpoint of the person who has the least. Is that system making the janitor better off than they would be in any other possible system? That is a really high bar. Okay, so a prescription is great, but what about the follow-up care? The long-term plan for keeping society healthy? Well, Rawls thought about that too. He basically designed a civic recovery plan to make sure a just society could actually last. And the key exercise in this recovery program is something he called public reason. The idea is pretty simple but powerful. When we're in the public square debating big political issues, we have to use reasons that all of our fellow citizens could reasonably be expected to endorse. It doesn't matter what your private beliefs are, religious, philosophical, whatever. We have to find a shared political language we can all use. It's about building common ground. And you gotta understand, Rawls wasn't some starry-eyed dreamer. He knew a perfect world was impossible. His goal was what he called a realistic utopia. Kind of sounds like a contradiction, right? But what he meant was a society that is as just as it can possibly be, while still being something that actual, real-life human beings can build and sustain, especially in a world with so many different beliefs. Now, of course, no doctor's orders go unchallenged, right? It's always a good idea to get a second opinion. And believe me, Rawls's ideas kicked up a massive debate that is still going strong today. And two of the biggest critiques came from completely different directions. On one side, you have the libertarians, like Robert Nozick. He basically said, whoa, hold on, this whole plan violates individual liberty. He argued that redistributing wealth is a form of coercion that ignores what people are entitled to based on their own choices in history. Then from the other side, you have communitarians like Michael Sandel. Their beef was with the veil of ignorance itself. They said, you can't just imagine a person who's a blank slate. We are our communities, our families, our traditions. You can't just separate us from all that. So let's wrap this up by bringing it all back to where we started, this idea of philosophy as a kind of social medicine. Look, at the end of the day, whether you agree with every detail of his prescription or not, what John Rawls gives us is something incredibly valuable. He gives us a standard of care for society. He's handed us a practical toolkit for diagnosing our own biases, a way to stress test the fairness of our institutions, and a powerful vision for what a better, more just world could actually look like. It's a framework that can help us, at the very least, start the work of trying to heal ourselves. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If John Rawls was our doctor, right here, right now, what symptom of our society would you want him to diagnose first? Is it political polarization, economic inequality, something else entirely? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.